Hi there, and welcome to LinkedIn Live. I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm April Callis-Birchmeier, Certified Change Management Professional and Project Management Professional. And today I wanted to share with you, we wanted to talk about LinkedIn Live, about measuring change, because I want to make sure that everybody that I talk with, everybody that I work with, understands the importance of why we need to measure change. So I know I'm starting just a moment early, so I wanted to really take a moment to say welcome to everybody. As I mentioned, I'm April Callis-Birchmeier, Certified Change Management Professional, Project Management Professional, and today I wanted to talk about why we need to measure change impact. This is a really important piece of organizational change management, measuring the change impact. And when we are thinking about a change of some sort, we really have to understand what we're getting into, because I think many times we start a change and there's a scope, we have a project charter, we have, some research, we have our change description that we've been working on. We've been thinking about the vision, how to express that vision. We know our vision, but we want to express it in a relevant and relatable way for others, so that they can understand and get on board with that vision. I really love a relevant, relatable story that resonates with our target audiences about the change. But one of the key pieces, and in fact, it's early in our assessment phase, is determining and really assessing and measuring that change impact. And so in our standard for change management, which is the Association of Change Management Professionals standard guide that outlines the practices of change management, in the standard, this is under our first process group, which is Evaluate Change Impact and Organizational Readiness, 5.1. And in 5.1, this is 5.1.7, is Assess the Change Impact. And it comes after the point of where we're really thinking about defining that change, developing the vision of the change. We are working on determining our identity, our identity of our stakeholders. We're thinking about who these stakeholder groups are. We're identifying the goals and the objectives and success criteria of our change. We're thinking about our sponsor. Who is our change management sponsor? Who is the throat to choke? Who is the person who's going to lead this change? We want to look at our stakeholders, as I said, identify those. And then we want to really take all of this information and start to measure our change impact. We want to assess and measure the change impact so that we know, how big is this bread box, right? How big is this change? How complex is this change? And when we're thinking about measuring the change impact, we really want to identify and we want to categorize things like, who is affected by this change? In what way will this group be affected? This is why we have to have our stakeholders figured out somewhat. We also want to think about, how it is that, how complex this change is. To what degree are we changing? Is this a minor change where we're adopting a new program and maybe we have new policies? Or is this a major ERP transformational change where we will have multiple stakeholders doing their work, doing their jobs in a brand new system with new technology? I mean, that's a much larger type of change than some of the smaller changes that may be program related. So we're thinking about all these things in measuring our change impact. We want to understand, who's going to be affected, what's going to be affected, to what degree all of this change is going to happen. We're also thinking about, how we're going to describe the change to the various stakeholder groups, because our leaders will maybe have a different understanding, different description of the change than what we'll be sharing with an internal stakeholder, perhaps, or an external stakeholder. And then once we're working on these pieces, we want to look at the size and scope and the complexity of this change. So to do this, to measure this change impact, which is so critically important to all of the rest of the work that we're going to be doing, to make this measurement possible and to be able to start to collect the information, I use a change impact assessment. And I'll share with you my change impact assessment. The change impact assessment that I use, I'll show you the PDF version, which is the pretty version. I use two versions of everything. I have a PDF that I like to put in my plan, that I like to share with my leadership, my sponsor, and key stakeholder groups. I also have an Excel document that I use because I need the room. I need to be able to capture a lot of information in one place. So here's my my PDF of our change impact assessment. Hopefully you can see this. There it is. And as you can see, let me see if I can make this a little bit easier to read. There we go. Ooh, a little too easy to read. In this change impact assessment, I'm really asking questions of my project management professionals, my PMO director, my stakeholders, business leaders, and I'm also asking some key stakeholder groups, as I had mentioned. I might be asking and talking with my sponsor as well. And I'm using these questions in interviews because I am trying to determine, what's going to change because of this initiative, because of this project. So one of the questions, obviously, is what's the projected go live date? Like, this is sort of just a baseline holder for me. I'm hopefully very aware of the go live date. Some initiatives, though, we have multiple go live dates. And so in that case, I may either put the multiple go live dates and kind of that cadence of how things are going to roll out, or I may actually do a separate change impact measurement, change impact assessment for different rollouts. And then I want to really have a sense of how many people are impacted by this initiative or project. I'm going for like a big number first. Give me the total number first. And then I'm going to try to break it down from there because I want to think about how many of these folks are internal, who are either employees or internal contractors, internal to the core group, and how many are external stakeholders or customers or clients. And now you can see I have these responses here, which makes it kind of handy because I can circle one of these. But what I'm really after, and this is why I'm using my Excel document to capture this information, what I'm really interested in finding out, the thing that I'm really after is the detailed information. So I can either say there are several rollouts, several go live dates over the course of this rollout, and I can include that detail here, or I can have separate plans here for those different rollouts. I'm going to describe why I have whatever number I have. I'm going to give sort of an overarching response. For example, I worked on a large statewide project. We had 10 million stakeholders because they were all citizens of the state, and yet I was not going to be touching all 10 million of these stakeholders. All of them would know something about our project, but when we boiled it down, we really had like maybe 10,000 internal stakeholders who would be impacted. And so that was very, quite a bit smaller than the 10 million that we've been looking at in terms of all of the stakeholders. And then when I was thinking about our external customers and clients, I was taking a subset of that 10 million. So it was, it was running about 3 million were going to be my actual involved stakeholders versus sort of a need to know. So then I'm thinking about another couple of things. I want to understand how much variation there is for these different stakeholders in this change. A good example of this would be something like if you're thinking about the variability between an end user and an influential stakeholder, right? An end user is somebody who is actually going to be using the the new system, going to be using the material, going to actually be hands-on in this change, right? This is an end user, they're consuming this change. If you think about putting fuel in a car, right? The end user is the person who is taking the pump and putting it into the nozzle and pumping the gas and then putting that back. So that would be our end user, somebody who's actually touching that change. Then we have other layers of stakeholders who are all involved and impacted by the change, but maybe not touching it directly. And so I'm trying to have a sense of how much variation there is. If everybody's changing in the same way, like we're all experiencing a new upgraded system and we all have, pretty much the same role, that's very different than if I have people who have really a lot more variation in their changes, just in terms of thinking through how much training time I may need. I'm trying to think through how much support those folks will need as we're moving into our go live phase, and then how much support they'll need to sustain that change. And then will the change actually hit those internal stakeholders to make them work differently? How is that going to impact them? And then same question for the external. Now, at this point in time, you might be thinking, well, that's a great list of questions, April. And where the heck am I going to get all of this information from? I have to tell you, it is difficult sometimes to figure out where do we get this information? How do we find information that will help us to be able to identify these things? And I'm looking in a number of different places for this information. Some places I'm looking at like my organization's strategic plan. I would say pretty much every company or organization has some form of a strategic plan, some form of strategy that is either, out for a year, out for 5 years, sometimes even 10 years. And I know that when I have used strategic plans in the past, I've always been very interested in the amount of information I can glean from such a document. In fact, one of the very first change management projects I was working on, I had my 5-year strategic plan, and it was daunting. It was large. It was a big binder. And I thought, well, I'll just plug my way through this strategic plan. And about, 20 pages in, I discovered something that everybody had forgotten was in the strategic plan. And it was sort of a burning platform for change. It said, we must get part of this change done because of a technical issue that's about to occur. Well, I was excited because I had been having a hard time trying to get people moving on the change. And I thought, here it is, this fabulous burning platform, as Cotter would say, to get people that sense of urgency to start moving forward on the change. So I went to my leader and I said, I found it. I found the burning platform. I found the rally, where we can rally and create this sense of urgency. And she said, oh, we've already solved that technical problem, but I'm happy to see you're reading the strategic plan. And I really thought the strategic plan would be quite a dull read, but it was really fascinating because I started to see the bigger picture of how the technology change that we were implementing was going to impact the overall institution and what a long-lasting impact that would have. So it was very fascinating to me to have this 5-year strategic plan. I see more organizations recently going to like a 3 to 5 year or even a 1 to 3 year plan because change is happening so much more quickly than it used to in the environment, that these strategic plans don't have the long life that they maybe would have had previously. So I look at strategic plan, I'm looking at research. I like to go back and look at lessons learned from previous changes. I'm also doing some research and digging around from other institutional or organizational reports, like an annual report. I think that's a great place to find information. And then HR is also a wealth of information because they have the numbers that I'm looking for many times around stakeholders and different stakeholder groups, and helping me to discern, like from an organizational perspective, which of these stakeholders are going to be impacted from this change and which are not. So I'm thinking about all of this in terms of, where do I get this information from HR, from business research, from the strategic plan, from the overarching charter. There's always a charter for a change project. If it's called just a project, there's a project charter, and change management professionals, can absolutely gain a lot of information from that. And then I'm going back to my change impact assessment, which I'll share again here. I'm going back to that change management, or the change impact assessment, this way that I measure. Let me see if you can see that. There we go. And I'm looking again. I want to keep going through, and I'm looking and I see, does this change involve business process, technology, or organizational structure? Some changes are all three, some changes are more involved than that. So just really trying to kind of identify, all of those moving pieces, right? Because many times when we're doing a large technology transformation or some sort of digital transformation, the information that is coming, the change that's coming from that technology will impact process, will impact organizational structure. It may impact roles and responsibilities. We may have, entire sections of our organization may no longer be doing what they're currently doing. So I think it's very important that we're taking the time to determine all of that while we're breaking down the complexity of this change and thinking about, how we're going to manage this change effort. And all of this should really inform and guide our strategy. So I have a few additional questions, but the goal is not to just circle the yes or no's. The goal is to really capture information in this details section. And that's why I use my Excel document, so I can capture a lot of detail. I think these are two of the most important questions here. Will this change be a relief and be seen as something that's positive and welcome to the stakeholders? Or does this change feel like a loss and something that the stakeholders are dreading? Now, different stakeholder groups may have different perceptions. So we want to keep that in mind, right? That these targeted groups have different feelings about different pieces of the change. And yet it's good to have a sense and kind of keep your thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the organization. Is this something that people are just like rolling their eyes and dreading and becoming very resistant about? Or is this something that people cannot wait to have? They know that this is going to make life better and easier, even though it's going to be difficult to go through the change process itself. And then how do other projects impact this initiative or change? This is where I really like to kind of put each stakeholder group front and center of a change map, if you will. And I like to map out all the different changes that are impacting this particular stakeholder group. And think about what is impacting the stakeholder group at the same time, or very closely impacting? Like, is there a way we can make some adjustments to sort of shift the balance a bit, make a better fit so not everything is impacting the same stakeholder group at once? I do a lot of work with health centers and healthcare providers. And one of the challenges is that many times that the front desk of those healthcare providers gets hit with the most change all the time, because there's always something new for them in terms of technology. I think there always feels like we're upgrading or integrating something new into their system that they use for scheduling appointments and for managing patients, and then even the back end, billings and accounts payable. All of those pieces are generally in that front desk function. And so they're usually getting a lot of technology changes, plus they get a lot of program and policy changes because, when we're always trying to continuously improve, we're saying, oh, we need, could you please put 3 people into this, 40-minute slot instead of 2? And that's a change for them. So there's always a lot of change going on from other projects at the same time as we're maybe implementing a technology change. And we want to recognize those so we can space it out a little bit and give them a little bit of room to absorb a change before we're giving them another one. We don't want it all to pile up at one time. And then I think it's really important to identify how you plan to measure success overall. And this is tough because we have to have a sense of, what it is that we identify as a success measure and put that in place before we start all of the work of the change, before we start to implement our strategy and start to create the plans that we need to execute this change, before we even start that execution phase of the change management effort. So answering these questions, asking these questions is important, because if we don't ask these as change professionals, how are we going to have the information we need to be able to make decisions and to create strategy? The information from this change impact assessment should inform our strategy. It should help us develop that strategy and explain why this strategy matters, why we want to go in this direction. It also should help us identify risk to the change itself, risk within the organization. Maybe there's a lot of changes happening and we may have a lot of change saturation where people are just overwhelmed and can't take one more thing, or risks such as resistance. That can be a great risk for a change. When we have a lot of resistance, when we have many people shouting loudly and resisting a new approach, a new product, a new structure, or a new technology, it can really put us back quite a bit in terms of being able to execute the change cleanly, to be able to gain stakeholder adoption, and to be able to help those stakeholders who must move from where they currently are, that current state, to the future state. We want to help them move to that future state. We don't want them to get left behind. We don't want them to drop down into the valley of despair on the change curve just because we cannot break through that resistance. So understanding resistance, planning for it, planning for these risks is a really important piece of our strategy, and we cannot do it without identifying some of the information that we have here in our change impact assessment. So this change impact assessment, you can create your own. If you are interested in mine, let me know. But I think one of the big pieces is just this recognition. The recognition that when I have this change impact assessment, I can then take that information and start to develop all of my strategy about how I plan to conduct training, what kind of communication approach we're taking, how will we be working with the sponsor, how are we going to engage our stakeholders with this change, what's our plan or our strategy for learning and development. And that strategic thinking, that strategic piece is in 5.2 in the standard for change management. 5.2 is formulate the change management strategy. And so when we're looking at our standard, and you can get the standard for free, you can download it for free at acmpglobal.org. You can go right to the standard and fill out a couple of pieces of information and download it for free. But when you're looking at 5.2, formulate the change strategy, and you're wondering, where do I have the information to be able to develop the strategy? You have that information in your change impact assessment because you've measured the impact of this change. So that's where you're getting the information from. If you feel like you don't have enough information there, keep chasing down those responses. I think one of the keys also for the change impact assessment is because it has to be completed before I can really start to develop the strategy and the plan. 5.3 in the change management standard is develop the change management plan, which is made up of component plans. But since I have to work on both the strategy and the plan, I need a lot of responses, which means that with my change impact assessment, I can ask my leaders, I can ask stakeholders, I can ask my sponsor very confidently for information to help me make these decisions. And once I have that information, I may need to still refine it. So it's never really quite done. Just as many of the tools that we use in change management are never really quite finished, where you say, that's done, and now I'll turn to the next step. It's kind of organic, it's always growing. We're always finding things, much like our stakeholder identification assessment, where I'm sometimes finding new stakeholder groups well into the change, but we're adapting to that new stakeholder information. We're adapting that new information, putting it into our change impact assessment so that we are able to really work with people and chase down the information that we need to find. So when I'm thinking about this change impact assessment and how I'd like you to take a look at it and to practice using this tool or something similar to this, um, you know, this is a great opening for you to be able to talk with others on the team to find out the information, to dig in and do some research, to read those plans and read those documents and that charter that should lay things out for you quite well. And I want you to practice using that, because when we're looking to gain this information, I mean, it is difficult to capture information. And I think these tools sometimes are just a great reason to go and ask questions. So I'd like, if you have thoughts about that or what you use, you are welcome to comment um, in our conversation here, because I'd love to hear if there are other types of tools that you use when you're trying to measure the impact of this change. Measuring the impact of the change is essential to finishing kind of that assessment phase. It's right in the middle. So we have 5.1 through 5.15, 5.1.1 through 5.1.15 in the standard of evaluate the change impact and organizational readiness. And all of those 5.1 assessments are difficult to get through altogether. This change impact assessment, this change impact work that you will be doing is telling you what are these impacts that you need to go look at. Because in many cases, we might be having something like assess the organizational capacity for change. On a number of implementations I've done, that would not be a piece of my assessment, because we're adopting a large, new, big technology. And when I'm looking at the capacity, I am already thinking about that. What are the other changes happening in the organization? But I may not do a formal assessment on that. I might write it up as a risk, or something along the lines of, looking at external factors sometimes. Many times it doesn't matter what the external factors are to an organization going through change. We may have our CEO or our change sponsors say, this has to be done no matter what's going on out in the world, right? And so I don't always have that type of an assessment. And so the change impact assessment has a great role in helping me determine what other assessments need to be done and what I need to do with that information and how I need to take it forward into development of my strategies, my plans, and then executing the change, and then of course completing that change management effort. So I hope this has been helpful for you today to understand what it is that we need to measure when we're measuring change impact, why we need to measure this change impact, and how we need to go about finding the information that will help us determine how much impact this change will have on the organization, its sponsors, its stakeholders, and its customers and clients. And then you can take that information forward into your strategy plan and then execute your change. So this has been a terrific conversation. Thank you so much for coming and talking with me. And please, again, feel free to comment with each other. I'd love to have a conversation with you and to continue talking about why we measure change impact. I'll see you next time. Thanks.